I have always wanted to watch an R-rated Wolverine movie, and now, thanks to Deadpool, it has finally happened. But, is it better than the previous Wolverine film? Well, in this versus video, we are going to find out. Let's get to it. Now, both of these movies are meant to encompass an emotional story for Wolverine. In Logan, 15 years have passed since the present timeline at the end of Days of Future Past, and all mutants are now dead with the exception of our three main characters. And Logan is now looking after Xavier, who is mentally not well. In the Wolverine, he's still not over Jean's death, so he decides to have time to himself and go on a journey or something so he can clear his head. Either that or he just wants to be a loner. And he gets involved with protecting this woman who is on the Yakuza's hit list and so on and so forth. Now, even though the personal story in the Wolverine makes sense, I wasn't too keen on it. I understand that it was kind of natural for the series to continue this way, but it was just Logan trying to cope with a tragic love story. Which, don't get me wrong, I do understand and sympathize with, but haven't we seen enough of that already? In X-Men 1, there were seeds planted that he had a thing for Jean. In X-Men 2, he was clearly into her, and in X-Men 3, Jean comes back and that puts him in the forefront of another love story. After that, we got an unfaithful prequel so that we could see Wolverine involved in a different story. Oh, who am I kidding? It was just another love story. And in the Wolverine, he is getting over his original love interest whilst getting involved with another. You see what I'm getting at here? Wolverine has been given too much love in his movies, so forgive me if I'm bored of the same story element for showing its face for the 5th time. And it's in this department where I have to really give props to Logan. There is no love interest in here. There's not even a mention or callback to one. Instead, you get to fully witness Logan's relationship with Xavier and X-23 without any love interest getting in the way. And this leads to a much more dark and emotional character-driven story that I will talk about in the very next segment. So in regards to story, Logan wins hands down. In the Wolverine, we obviously have Logan as our main character, and as always, Hugh Jackman is perfect in the role, and there is nothing I can criticize about his performance. The rest of the characters on the other hand, like Mariko, her father, her grandfather, and her ex-boyfriend, I honestly didn't give a crap about any of them. Yukio was okay, but on the whole, these characters are just nobodies. Now, to be fair, the actors did as good a job as they could with the material they were given, but they were so dull, and whatever little bit of interest you initially have in them, if any, dies out very quickly. And that's all I have to say about them. Now it's time to talk about the characters in Logan. The best way I can describe the characters in this movie is sad. Logan is now so old to the point that he's very weak and his healing abilities are barely working. And Professor Xavier is so mentally unwell to the point that he is no longer looking after mutants anymore, but is instead being looked after by Logan. Add to that the fact that they live in a dump, and Logan is working day and night shifts as a limo driver to make small amounts of money at a time so he can pay for Xavier's medication and to afford to have them move to a much nicer location near the ocean. That part of the storyline is depressing in of itself, and it gets even more so as the movie goes on, but in a wonderful way, as it really gets you emotionally invested. As a character, Logan is also much harder in this movie. In his previous films, whenever he would talk to kids, he would loosen up, but in this, he really doesn't give a crap. He'll still talk to X-23 just as hard as he would to any other adult, and he would even yell at her. This not only makes him more accurate to his comic book counterpart, but it also shows how much he has been affected mentally since the previous films. And again, it's very sad to see our characters in this tortured state. Back when we were kids, the idea of hanging out with these guys was fun, but seeing them like this really does punch your childhood fantasy in the face. And both Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart lose themselves in these performances unbelievably well. Patrick Stewart was phenomenal as Charles Xavier. In his very first scene, he has to babble and act mentally ill, and coming from someone who has actually seen old people do mental babble in real life, his performance was so authentic. He also pulls off his emotions incredibly well. Anytime he was acting sad and depressed and was apologizing for his fatal actions or was showing a shred of happiness, I completely bought it. And I would go as far as to say that this is Patrick Stewart's best performance. And I can wholeheartedly say the same for Hugh Jackman. We've seen him play Wolverine before, but everything about his performance seems amplified this time round. For example, we have seen Hugh Jackman cry as Wolverine before, but this is the first movie where I actually started to tear up with him. And the way he switches between these different emotions is masterful. Seriously, Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart were amazing in this movie. And if this really is their final go as these characters, then I am perfectly happy with it. And in case you're wondering, no, I haven't forgotten, we must talk about X-23 played by Daphne Keane. As far as the character goes, she is kind of like an untamed animal that Xavier and Logan try to keep under control. And what's very commendable is that even though she is an uncaged killing machine, she also has the tendencies of a child. And that adds to the authenticity that at the end of the day, she's just a kid with these powers. And thankfully, she is not just a kid Terminator like the trailers would have you believe. She actually showcases a variety of different emotions, and she does it better than many other professional A-list actors out there. Speaking of which, when Logan dies, she starts weeping, and it was very convincing, but she still took it a step further by having snot come out of her nose. That little detail added so much legitimacy to the scene, and it really worked. That is something actors never really bothered to do, but she did it. An 11-year-old girl that is acting in her first ever movie. And I'm not kidding when I say this, but this little girl really puts Jennifer Lawrence to shame for giving an absolutely shit performance in X-Men Apocalypse. And if she hasn't put Jennifer Lawrence to shame enough, the connection that she develops with Xavier, and especially Logan, was perfectly handled as opposed to whatever the hell this was. And seeing Xavier be in this depressed state, yet he still tries to talk to X-23 like he did his students in the old days, was really touching and heartfelt. Despite all the depressing stuff going on, it reminds you of the good old days. And finally, we have Caliban. Now, although it was good to have an extra character for Logan to interact with, Caliban was just here as a plot device. And he stands out as a plot device because all the other characters here are incorporated into the story organically and have purpose. But Caliban lazily dishes out a bunch of exposition about Logan to Logan himself, who already knows this stuff, so really, he's just there to explain things to us, the audience. He also has the power to track mutants. Oh, I wonder if the bad guys capture him and use him to find Logan and Xavier. Yeah, he just felt shoehorned into the movie. Beast would have been a far more interesting side character to include here. That being said, when he was being tortured, I did genuinely feel bad for him, which is quite interesting, as I don't see myself being that sentimental for shoehorned characters like this. So the performances from our three main characters are phenomenal. In The Wolverine, the character moments are boring and feel like padding, whereas in Logan they are entertaining and feel necessary. So, as if that wasn't clear enough, Logan hands down is the winner with regards to characters and performances. The action in The Wolverine is well choreographed, fast-paced, creative, and beautifully shot. I do think that there are not enough proper action sequences though. This movie only has 5. The funeral, the bullet train, the fight with the ninjas, Yukio and Logan's fight against Yoshida, and the climax fight against the CGI garbage can. Although that might sound like a good amount of action scenes, most of them are pretty short, and because this movie feels so sluggish with its pacing, you end up begging for more. The action in Logan, on the other hand, is everything we have always wanted it to be. Not only does Wolverine stab people with really bloody results, but he also cuts off limbs and in one scene cuts a guy's head off. And it's actually a lot better than I thought it would be. This movie has a really gritty cinematography and aesthetic to it, and that makes the blood and gore look very realistic despite it all being CGI. No other movie with CGI blood has ever looked this good. And what's great is that it does not flaunt the R rating, as some people say. It is very organic, and even the swearing is being used in the exact same way any of us would use it if we were in these unfortunate situations. Again, despite what some people say. And what's really clever about the blood is that it actually plays a part in the story and has an impact on our characters. The movie also has its own commentary on violence, and it was handled incredibly well. The only other comic book characters in movies that have this level of depth to their violent actions is Batman from the Dark Knight trilogy, and to see Logan tackle it from a different perspective was very refreshing, and it gave levity and depth to the R rating as opposed to just being rated R for the mindless blood and gore. And the blood and gore is anything but mindless in this movie, yet again, despite what some people say. So yeah, it isn't surprising, but the movie with the best action is Logan. Heck, even the car chase scene here was a lot better than the more sophisticated bullet train sequence. As for villains, in The Wolverine our main villains are Yoshida, who is not in the spotlight for long, the old man who we thought was dead for 90% of the movie, and Viper, who is not a mutant in the comics, and I'm just gonna say it, sucks. Her acting sucks, her villainous motivations suck, and her dialogue, much like Jared Leto's Joker, is under the delusion that it's being smart and deep, when really it's just a bunch of random words that are slapped together.
What are you?
A chemist, nihilist, capitalist, a mutation, a viper.
Also, I don't know what the hell this was meant to be. I mean, what the hell was that? Dumbass. But yeah, the villains in The Wolverine are weak and there's too many of them. Now the villains in Logan are just very simple bad guys who are coming after X-23, and they could have very easily been weak villains, but there is one aspect about them that elevates them from being just a typical crappy bad guy. And that is that the movie does an effective job at making you hate them. If you look at other crappy villains from other Marvel movies, these villains suck because you don't hate them and they don't give you a reason to. The villains in Logan, you just really want to see them suffer a painful death for the crimes they commit, and that's what prevents them from falling in the crappy villains category. So even though they're not great, I still think they were good, but nothing more than that. So the villains in Logan are better than the ones in The Wolverine, but not by a great deal. The bad stuff about the Wolverine is, as I mentioned, all the characters except for Logan are completely boring, and that is a major problem for the movie. It's not very engaging, the pacing is unbelievably slow, the villains are weak, the action doesn't last long, I don't care for the story, and the movie feels longer than 2 hours, and that's not good. It really should have been shorter because it is unnecessarily long. But other than that, I had no problems with it. Now, I did have some problems with Logan too. This movie is based in the year 2029, and I couldn't help but notice that all the technology they're using is our present day technology, and nothing about it was futuristic in any way. Although I am willing to forgive this as it is a detail, it's still something that always crosses my mind from time to time when I'm watching this movie. Also, the music does add to the depressing tone, but later on during the action when it gets louder, I thought it could have been better. And as much as I loved the final fight of the movie, everyone I have talked to all have small ideas of things that they would either add or change to make it a little better. And my final complaint is that there was a nude breast scene. Now, as I said earlier, this movie enforces its R rating very organically, but this was the only scene in the movie where it felt forced. And I expected better. That is what dumb R-rated movies do, not smart ones like this, so I expected them to be better than that. And I do have some other technical complaints, but on the whole, that's really about it. So you might have noticed that I have had very little to say about the Wolverine, but a lot to say about Logan. And that's because the main problem with the Wolverine is that there's not much to it, especially its characters. Logan is the only one I was rooting for, and taking his healing ability away was a good plotline, but that is a very thin story element that only really pays off when he's involved in a fight scene, which are very minimal in this movie. The Wolverine had one interesting plotline that it spread out throughout the entire movie, and the rest felt like padding, much like a really slow season of a TV show. But in Logan, I cared about all the characters. Logan, Xavier, X-23, and even the family they run into. Now, some people are saying that Logan is about 10 to 20 minutes too long, but in all honesty, I found the length of this film to be perfect, because when it was over, I was thinking, has it been over 2 hours already? To me, the movie felt like it was an hour and a half, and I didn't expect to feel that way from one of James Mangold's films, because all his previous movies, including The Wolverine, drag and have severe pacing problems. But I did not find that here, so I have got to commend him for that. Also, this definitely felt like it had absolutely no Hollywood elements to it at all, and it was so refreshing. The world is not at risk of being destroyed, there is no giant mushroom cloud in the sky, it is just a realistic sized incident that involves our main characters, and I never thought I would prefer a smaller climax as opposed to a larger one with a shitload of special effects. But it just goes to show how much we have been fed the same stuff to the point that we are just numb to it now. The R rating is absolutely pivotal to tell this really mature story, and it never felt forced, with the exception of that one brief scene I mentioned earlier. I should also say that the jokes in this were great. Despite being a very depressing movie, they were still able to put some jokes in here that fit and did not feel like forced humor, much like all the jokes from the Marvel Extended Universe movies.
What do you want, Strange?
Books on astral projection.
You're not ready for that.
Try me, Beyonce. Oh, come on. You've heard of her. She's a huge star, right?
But here's the really big compliment. In regards to its characters, drama, and tone, this is the only comic book movie that comes close to matching The Dark Knight with these elements. Now, it's not as good as The Dark Knight with regards to its story and villains, but in regards to the characters, drama, and tone, this is the next Dark Knight, a feat that no other superhero movie has reached. And it feels so refreshing to finally get a superhero movie that actually takes a step further as opposed to staying in its comfort zone like practically every other Marvel Extended Universe movie. Watching these two argue with each other is very entertaining, and it seems so real to see their dynamic change so much when compared to all the previous movies. It really is great to sit through. After Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, so many studios have been trying to make their superhero movies more grounded and realistic, and to this day they all come off as cheap knockoffs, but Logan is the only one that succeeds and uses it to his advantage. So now it's time for the scores. The Wolverine gets a 5 out of 10, and Logan gets a 9. I really do love this movie so much, and it's my next favourite superhero film after the Dark Knight trilogy. So that's it for this versus video, guys. In the future, I will compare Logan to Deadpool so we can just see which R-rated comic book movie is truly superior. If you want to be notified of the video as soon as I upload it, then click that subscribe button and the bell right next to it so you will be notified as soon as it goes up. Also, feel free to donate to my Patreon page as it will help me compare more movies that are in theaters, and you will also be rewarded with perks. One of them being that you will get to have an hour-long Skype chat with me every month to discuss a movie I have done a versus video on, or just any other movie or TV show in general you fancy talking about. A link to my Patreon page is in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch all of you next time. Take care.